Welcome, everybody, to the show. Today we have, once again, Wade Harlan. Welcome, Wade.
Thank you. It's great to be aboard again.
Wade, what a pleasure it is to have you back. And before we start, we are going to review a different book. And before we start, I would like to say, one of the reasons I wanted you back is because our first discussion was so good. It's actually impacted my teaching. It's given me, and for those of you who haven't seen it, it's the discussion with Wade and his wife Harlan around the Jim Trelease book, the Read Aloud book. And what's been really helpful to me is every time I want to think or say as I approach my class, well, all we're going to do is read. I realize, no. This is the best thing we're going to do today. Anything else is just secondary. So I just wanted to say thank you for the discussion because it was truly helpful to me as a teacher.
And Wade, I started doing it this summer. Actually, I did it right away, summer school. I started reading to the kids and man, it's been so good. And so, yeah, like Ruben shared, this is the best PD for us to talk to people like yourself to learn. And it's even better when you start implementing it into your class. So anyway, thank you.
Oh, thank you guys. Glad to hear that you're doing it. That's important.
Mm-hmm. So today we're talking about the book Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And it's a cool little book. It's a book that it'll be a freewheeling discussion, by the way, because I lost all my notes. I'm just gonna kind of like wing it. And first of all, Wade, how did you come upon this book?
Yeah, actually, it was through my kids. My son, when he was a freshman at college, he took some graphic design courses, and in the course, they had to read the book, Steal Like an Artist. And so we got talking, a couple years ago, I did a sermon on creativity. And when he heard that, he said, oh, well, you've got to read this book. So I got it and read it and then loved it. It's such a unique and fun book. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Well, let's talk about it because you said the word artist and creativity. And I think that some people might look at this title and think, well, I'm not an artist. And in particular, my favorite quote or maybe part of the book is write the book you want to read. How might that approach to life be relevant, certainly to a podcast like this where we talk about teachers and anything not related to authors or writing books? Write the book you want to read. How is that relevant, Wade?
Yeah, I was really struck by that statement too. I think it's just a unique perspective. We often don't think about what kind of book would I like to read? What kind of TV show would I like to see? What kind of poem would I like to hear about? And then when you put it in those terms, then what's kind of cool about it is you realize, oh, well, if that's what I would like, I might be the one that ought to write that. So it's very empowering. That's what I like about it.
I would like to say that I've actually heard of this concept prior to the book from another podcast, the Tim Ferriss podcast. And he made a statement that kind of influenced me a few years ago: scratch your own itch. So the way I would perceive it as a teacher is that about 5 or 6 years ago, I was about to teach a class, English 9, and I hadn't taught that in a while. And I thought, what's new? What's new in teaching? What's going on in teaching? And I started scouring videos on YouTube, and there wasn't much. And I was getting frustrated. And then I realized, man, maybe I need to be that person who introduces something new in teaching. And then to Jake's credit, Jake was the one that approached me about this podcast a year ago. And I thought, that's perfect. And it'll be easier to do it with somebody else, to do a podcast about teaching. And so that's how
somebody you love too.
You're right. Well, somebody I tolerate. But this idea of scratch your own itch or write the book you want to read. Jake, do you relate to any of this?
I do. I mean, one of the first things that this book, there's so many like little anecdotes, little liners, and when you say scratch your, if you have that itch, scratch it, right? But another line that came out was by Marcel Duchamp, right? I don't believe in art, I believe in artists. And I think we were talking way before that, like we all have a little art in us, and sometimes it just we stop believing in it, or it's inside of we think it's not inside of us anymore. But I think that's so true that we could go out and do things, but if you don't believe in it, if you don't believe that you have something to offer, nothing's gonna get done. So like what Ruben was sharing, he had these ideas to do something like this, and he went and did it. But if you don't believe in yourself, I think that's the first thing is you have to believe in yourself. And it's funny because Duchamp was an interesting artist. He had this one time he had a urinal. I had studied him in the past, and he said that's art. He put it on the wall, but it was like the way he saw it. He saw it in a different setting, different way, and there's something to it, right? But anyway, there you go.
Well, since you're on the topic of art, here's a quote: "Modern art equals I could do that plus yeah, but you didn't." It's that concept of people complaining. And we've done it, or at least I've done it, where it's like, that doesn't look like much. Yeah, but he did it. She did it. What did you do? Except complain about it. So there's something to say about that, about just getting up and starting. Yeah. Whatever you're up to, getting out there and at least beginning the process.
If I could pick up on that, Jacob mentioned that, he said we think about it, feel like we all have a little bit of artist in us. And that reminded me of this study that I read about in the 60s. A guy named Dr. Bob McKim was a creativity researcher at Stanford. And he did this experiment where he'd give 5 and 6-year-olds, so kindergartners, first graders, 30 seconds to make a picture of the person next to them. And then after 30 seconds was up, they would turn and show their artwork to the person. And he said, inevitably, every time these 5 and 6-year-olds were excited to show the person next to them their picture, and there was laughter, but it was a laughter of joy, of how fun that was. But then he did it for adults, and as you'd expect, every time there's laughter, but it's embarrassment, laughter of embarrassment, and lots of shame, and people didn't want to share their picture with another. And they did some more, and I think it was Madeline Langle that found it, or I read it from her, that she found that it was somewhere around like 2nd grade or 3rd grade, somewhere in there, they began to see a big change to where kids wouldn't want to show their piece to the next person. So it's kind of this idea that maybe we all are born as artists, but something in our society or some factor that I don't really understand often causes us to begin to think, oh, I'm not an artist. I'm no good.
Yeah.
So maybe true. This book has a clue to what that could be. So here's a interesting syndrome that he mentions on page 28. He calls it the 27, the Imposter Syndrome. Do you remember this, Wade?
Yeah.
And this is the definition. It's a psychological phenomenon in which people are unable to internalize their accomplishments. And he goes on to say, it means that you feel like a phony, like you're just winging it, that you really don't have any idea what you're doing. And in fact, we all get that self-consciousness to us. As teachers, wow, I'll get up in class and I'm thinking, I'm faking it. I'm a phony. I'm going to be discovered. And they're going to have to take me away like that teacher in School
I've been thinking about that for years, yes.
And but you get out there and you bring it and something magical happens. But that self-consciousness is real, isn't it?
Yeah, I think part of it is this idea that why the book's so powerful is we often feel like I don't have anything creative. I don't have any unique thoughts that nobody else has. And Cleon basically says, yeah, no artists do. They all learned their art by copying other people. And over the process of copying others and borrowing others' ideas, then eventually their own style emerged out of it. And so I think that's a really freeing idea, that I don't have to feel like I'm doing stuff that's nobody else has ever done. I copy others, and then eventually my style will come out of it.
And I think you use the example of like David Letterman copied Carson, right? Conan copied Letterman, but then they changed it. They didn't become that person. They had different nuances in the way they delivered, and then they were themselves, or they were different, but they did. That's first started by copying, you know. So there's something about that copying.
There's an homage to it. There's a hint of not worship, but a nod to your predecessors that you should embrace. And I think there's something, there is a line, there's a fine line, but there is a line to this idea of the hack who just takes from one person and just spits it out, as opposed to you're a person who's influenced by many, by many. And really a lot of the great artists started out, as I was reading this book and he mentioned copying, I can relate to this idea. I remember in college reading I was an English major, so we were reading great poets. And this, the professor mentioned how John Keats, the great romantic poet, started out as sort of not laughed at, but not accepted among critics because he sounded too much like others. But as he continued to write, he found his voice. And that you can't help but being influenced to embrace that, but to keep seeking your own voice, and you'll find it. Now, Wade, what would you say as you journeyed on through creative processes? What have you related to, and how has it manifested itself in your own creativity?
Yeah, I fortunately I had sisters and brothers that were involved in music in high school and in drama, so that I got involved in that kind of started helping me be a little more creative. And then I came upon a quote once, and it said, "The key to creativity is an obscure source." And I really liked that. It was because it was kind of the similar idea as Cleon. Basically, nobody has anything super original. It's all influenced by others, but people will think you're really creative if you just borrowed from a source they didn't know about.
Nothing's new under the sun.
Yeah. And things I was doing, it was stuff that it was a modification or some poor copy many times of somebody else's thing, but it kind of worked. And so, and I've just found, I get, just like kids, they want their art put up on the refrigerator because they enjoy it so much. I found that true for me. I don't have to have mine on the refrigerator, but I love doing it. And that whenever I'm creative, 90% of the time afterwards, I'm really glad that I tried it. Even if it didn't work out as good as I hoped, it's still, people love when you try to be creative. They really pay attention, and it's personally rewarding.
Absolutely. And what would you tell somebody who says, well, that's for him, that's for her, I'm not the creative type, I just do this, I'm a plumber, or I'm, I do this type of job? Isn't there something you could say to someone like that who maybe wouldn't think of themselves as a creative person?
Yeah, I think most people have that problem of that people put themselves in categories. There's the creatives and there's non-creatives. And I think a lot of times because we think of creativity, those are musicians and artists. But I think you can be creative in the way you make a meal. Maybe the way you scramble your eggs and you put this one little spice in it that makes it a little bit different, or the way you serve it up, or when you write an article, the way you write, you're creating when you write. And you're creating when you come up with a paper you write for school. And most people don't think of that as creativity. Even ordinary, like a plumber, the way he fixes the problem may be a little bit different than others. The way he uses his tools, that's all creativity. And I think when you realize that, you realize, wow, I get a lot of pleasure from that. And I always think of that we're created in God's image. God created, and afterwards he says, and it was good. You know, he created mankind. He said it was very good. God got pleasure. And I think in that respect, since we're created in his image, that's why we get pleasure from it. So yeah. I really think I'm so glad you're having a podcast on creativity, because if people will be more creative, they're going to be happier. They're going to find a lot of joy.
For sure.
I think we've moved away from this idea of a 45-year-old, 50-year-old man taking up paints for the first time too. We can't imagine that, because, well, what's the point? Are they trying to become an artist and a successful person in their 50s? We can't imagine somebody just taking up the hobby. But there is a tradition of that. You know, we just reviewed not just, but a few months ago, we reviewed a book by about a man, Charles Strickland. The book title is The Moon is Sixpence, who took up painting in his 40s and was just some obscure banker, but he became a popular painter long after him taking it up, because he loved to paint. He wasn't after the money or the riches. He just loved to do it. He loved to express himself creatively with nothing else in mind. And there's something to say about that, and the joy of just expressing yourself. It seems like we've lost that. There's like an end to it. There's something to go. There's something to reach, as opposed to just doing it for the enjoyment. Now, this idea of copying might sound uncomfortable to people. This idea of just they might think of it as regurgitating, but for somebody who might not feel comfortable yet finding their voice, it is a noble pursuit to just finding the homage and then looking past. Eventually, you will find it. Now, Jake, what about you? Where do you express yourself creatively?
Well, Ruben, I'm glad you asked. I like to think that this podcast is a creative piece. I am, when we come here, we talk to different people, and I learn. And I think we're sharing before, like I shared before with Wade, that I took what I learned and put it in practice. But in the past, though, I was really interested in film, and I've done shorts, and I did a feature. And I was thinking about that. I love that process. And I think as long as you find something in different stages in your life, you find something that you enjoy doing artistic wise, and then you do it. One thing I learned, though, with this, one thing I really enjoyed, even as a teacher, to put it in practice, to show this with kids, is a lot of times kids don't learn, they learn different ways. There's different learning abilities and things they like to, how they learn. And one way is to get up and to stand up and to be kinetic, right? And to show that. And he shares that a little bit about that in his book, that sometimes you have to use your hands, right? When you're learning and you're getting the spices moving and your heart pumping, and to be, sitting there like a rock, that's not always the best thing, but to get up, to stand up, to move around, I think that's a big thing. And I want to be that person. I want to continue to be somebody who's being creative. And yeah, one time it might have been film, and now, working with the podcast, but I want to just continue to grow there. So it's exciting. Like you said, Ruben, you could be 40 years old. I'm past 40, and I still want to be that artist.
So here's a recommendation he gives. He says, he talks about Harold Ramis, the director, the actor and director. He says, find the most talented person in the room, and if it's not you, go stand next to him, hang out with him. What are your thoughts about that? Either of you.
Well, I like that quote, because I think later on he says that if you're the most talented person in the room, go find another room. So what he means is that find someone like that. And I think Harold Ramis said he found different people like Bill Murray and different other comedians, and to make him a better, to help him with his creativity. And I think that's smart, is to be with people who are searching like you're searching, to not so much searching, but who want to express themselves like you want to express yourself. So I think that's what Ramis was trying to share, is that find people who have that hunger, who want to be that person who wants to, be creative, show their talent. Maybe it's not talent yet, but to show their art.
Yeah, I think for me, it's also related to what you talked about writing the book that you'd like to see written.
Mm.
And years ago, I saw a guy do a dramatic portrayal of St. Patrick, and I just was mesmerized by it. And at that time, I'd been doing a research paper on this a famous Chinese missionary, Hudson Taylor, and his life was really interesting because he had a lot of weaknesses, but also a lot of strengths. And I was so enamored with him, and I realized, oh, I could do that. So I started developing it, and at first it went over better than I thought, but then I over time developed it, and then I went on to, I started preach. I preach twice a month now, and recently I did a one-man drama of Nicodemus. I've tried to do different things like that, and then another time I saw a guy, Lee Strobel. He did this series on what would God say to Madonna, what would God say to Steve Jobs, and so I thought about it. I said, oh, I could do that, and so I ended up doing one. What would God say to Kobe Bryant? What would God say to Johnny Cash? And those sermons, I've gotten more compliments about those than any others. And so I began to realize, wow, people really do pay attention in a different way when you do things creatively. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure as teachers, you see that. That's huge as a teacher.
And do you relate to this idea of finding people who are talented and just sort of nudging up to them, that you can grow that way? I remember by the way, a book I read by William Goldman, who mentioned that, and he was a film writer, a script writer. He mentioned that his quote was, "Talent tends to cluster." This idea that if you went and you looked out into a room during Stella Adler, I think it was Stella Adler, classes in New York in the 50s, you'll see Paul Newman, Montgomery Clift, James Dean. They were like in the same room studying up at the same time, and they competed with each other to be better than the next one. And he said that talent sort of clusters together because it builds on each other. So do you relate to that, Wade?
Yeah, I think maybe for me, I've done that some, and I've seen some people that did things that really influenced me. Cleon also talks about having a swipe file. And I learned this from my son. I noticed he was we'd be driving somewhere, he'd say, oh, stop, just a second, pull over. And he'd take a picture of some logo or something. It was when he was especially doing graphic design, or a building that he really liked or something. He was always taking pictures of things. And so he talked about how it kind of came from this book, and he'd keep a file of all these interesting ideas. And so I started doing that, taking pictures. For a while, my wife and I was finding old pieces of wood, and then she would paint slogans on them and things. And so I started taking pictures of different signs or different phrases that we liked and things like that. But that idea of, I didn't saddle up so much next to other creative people as I did.
Although your son would be an example of someone who was creative.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so I started doing what he did, keeping this file of pictures. Anytime I saw something that I thought was really creative or cool, I would keep it either as an article that I liked, put it on my computer in a file of creative stuff, or take pictures of it. So in that way, that's kind of how I learned to learn from other creative people and be inspired by them.
Very good. So here's another concept. Creativity is subtraction.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes it's useful to not keep everything, but to edit yourself. So there's a really good book by Greg McKeown called Essentialism, where he talks about the keeping what's essential and just sort of doing away with the excess. And somehow that's better it's not so much accumulating, but to keep what's important. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I have one. It reminds me, someone that influenced a lot of my teaching style is Dr. Bruce Wilkinson. And he has an idea called the irreducible minimum. So in every lesson he teaches, he figures out what is the essential part of the lesson that my students, they have to master or I'm a failure. And so he'd figure that out. And then on what he would do was he would not only teach them the concept, but he'd teach them how to remember the concept. And so they wouldn't leave the room until they knew the idea and how to learn it. So I think it's very similar to what you're saying. And I think that's always been really helpful to me. What's the core, and how do I help people remember and learn that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think even in the book, he has an example of Dr. Seuss, right? He had a little bet with a friend, or I think it was his publisher, can you do a book with only 50 words? And he goes, let me try. And he comes up with Green Eggs and Ham, which is one of the classics of all time. And it's the whole thing of putting restraints, right? I kind of relate to when he said something like, oh, try to if you want to do a movie, do it on an iPhone. I thought, wow, that's a great idea. Put some restraints on you, and man, a lot of creativity comes out of it, right?
Yeah.
If I could, how would I say that, or how would that play out in a teaching lesson? We're going to do a short story lesson that I taught soon, and I asked myself the question, how could I teach a short story? How could I teach fiction to high schoolers? What are the most important concepts? Because there's many things. That's what gets very frustrating and scary, is that where do I start? Where do I start? There's so many things I could teach a student: setting, dialogue, conflict, resolution. And I boiled it down to two things. I told my students, there's two things I want to see. There's two things I want to see. Besides the basic setting, give me a character in a setting. There's two things that need to be there. And I kept going back to those two things.
What are they?
Well, you're gonna have to see the video next week. But I'll tell you. I mean, I wanted to see dialogue, and I wanted to see foreshadowing, because I realized that a lot of students towards the end of their story tacked on some random stuff because they wanted to finish. So, and then a guy came out of the bushes, and he slashed him up, killed, and then ran away. And I'm like, who's this guy? Where did you foreshadow this? And I realized that they had to fix their stories. And I didn't teach them 1,000 concepts. I go, well, I only told you to do two things: foreshadow this and give me dialogue, because the dialogue was important, because a lot of students would cheat their way out of the stories by saying, and then he said this and she said that, and show us. Don't tell us, show us. And it really improved. But this is more than what you asked for, Wade, in the sense that, but I think in the sense of the specifics of Steal Like an Artist, but the idea of reducing and not giving too much, subtraction. Creativity is subtraction, and it's a very useful tool, that chapter. So any other further thoughts about that concept?
No, I think that we don't like to take out things. I think it's hard to do that. It's hard to edit yourself when you're being creative. But I think to start off with, you want to write everything you want. But I think we're talking about more of the finished product, right? Because I think as an artist, you want to just be able to express yourself and just, because sometimes I think people stop from moving forward because they feel like, it's just too much. But if you say, hey, no, I'm going to sit down for this 1 hour, no electronics. I think he talks about that, right? Get away from the TV, get away from your cell phone, and just write or draw, whatever you're doing that's creative. But I think later when you're looking at that piece of work, then that's when you choose to take out this and say, how fun. People might even ask the question, did you leave anything out, or is this what you always envisioned? And you say, oh, no, I had some other ideas. But that's a fun type of dialogue you could have afterwards. But yeah, that's my little 2 cents.
Okay, I'd like you to react to this quote. The work you do while you procrastinate is probably the work you should be doing for the rest of your life.
Who said that, Ruben? Do you know?
Oh, sorry. Jessica Hish.
Okay.
I don't know who that is, but what she says is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I would say that for me, this is a variation of another quote by Naval Ravikant, who said that, you found, I'm paraphrasing him, you found your calling in life in that what you're doing is work to others, but play to you.
Mm.
And for me, like if I were to, and then I'm gonna call on you, Wade, right now, then you, Jake, and maybe this is a good way to wrap up the show, unless you have anything else to add. But for me, I would say that would be this podcast. To me, this is not work in the sense that I like talking to people. I like building friendships and talking about cool books and, and or stuff on stage, like anything like stand-up comedy or performance. To me, it's just fun. Where I've had people tell me, I can't believe you did that. That would terrify me. I could never do that, getting up on stage and doing a routine. So I know that that's not real work. That's not my day job, neither of those two things, but it's fun. It's play. It's procrastinating until I go to work, until I clock in on Monday. What about you, Wade?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think some of the things I don't know if I would want to do it full time, but I should do it more. It were some of the things that I was fiddling around with in my spare time. One of the things, my son got a 3D printer, and I thought that was pretty cool. But then he encouraged me. He said he bought me a 3D pen, which takes the filament. It just comes in a little pen, and it's like a glue gun, except that it dries a lot faster and the filament's a lot smaller. And I started making things with that, and I just loved it. A few years ago, I made all my Christmas presents with this 3D pen. It was, I loved it, and some of them turned out pretty good. Some of them, they were not so good, but yeah, it's interesting. I think, and so many people need a hobby. Yeah. They do so much better in life and dealing with COVID and everything else when they've got something that they can spend a little time pouring their heart into.
Yeah, there you go. I can't wait till you tell Harlan that you'll be fiddling around with the 3D printer for the rest of your life for pay. I don't know how she's going to react.
Well, actually, if I could just segue, one other idea I really loved in the book, which related to that, was I was making, maybe I can have my wife get it, this in my son's room. Can you get that? I made these heads, and I used them so people could store their keys in them or whatever. And and the first one turned out really good. I was pretty proud of how it turned out. And then I hit a block and I couldn't get any of them to work. But Cleon has a chapter where he talks about the life of a project. And I thought this was one of the most helpful ideas to me. He says, step one, this is the best idea ever. And then the next step, okay, well, it's a little harder than I thought. And then this next stage is, oh, this is going to take some work. And then the next step is, oh, this sucks and it's boring, followed by the dark night of the soul. All is lost. This is hopeless. What was I thinking? And then the next step that you get to is, oh, well, it'll be good to finish because then at least I'll learn something for next time. And then often we end up with, well, it's done. And yeah, it kind of sucks, but it's not as bad as I thought. And I found just seeing somebody else put that in writing to what I've felt on so many projects, and that it's helped me to keep going when you get to that dark night of the soul. And it's like, why did I even start this? And it's not at all what I hoped for. But if you keep going, in the end, sometimes it turns out pretty cool. I got my visual aid here. I don't know if you can tell.
Nice,
it's the person, nice. But it actually, I don't know where it had a head to it, and the head comes up and you can store your keys inside it. And actually he ended up using it to put his earphones, to store his earphones. But I mean, I never would have thought I was going to make something like that.
Right.
And a few of them turned out good. And then a few of them were disasters.
I remember
nice.
that Steve Rinella, he does the Meat Eater podcast. He mentioned that, I'm paraphrasing him, about how real fun in life are usually experiences that during the process of them were real work or struggle, but that you ended up accomplishing something at the end. But during it, it wasn't so fun. And he mentions long hikes he took in Alaska. It was like wildernesses where he encountered bears, and that's his world. But then he reached the peak, or he reached, you know, the end, and it was like, whoa, that was fun. You know, you look at it differently when you reach it. So
So true.
What about you, Jake? You have any experience of something like that?
Well, you know, it's like that chapter on hobbies, and you should have one. And sometimes some people have a lot of passions. I don't have a lot of passions, but because sometimes others might have passions that they think they won't interact, but they do. And so it made me think about this. From the question you're asking regarding, you know, just even being creative with a hobby or something that you want to express yourself. I think, like I shared before, this podcast is that. But however, I also like to write, and I've done little writing for fun, and why not continue that and maybe even share about our experiences someday, Ruben, in a book or something in that form, because I think that would be like two passions kind of colliding. Writing about teaching or writing about what we do here, I think would be fun to do. And so, you know, I'm getting to that age now where retirement's coming, and this is although he would say, hey, do it now. You don't have to wait till you retire. Do it now. So I would start now, but I know that I would be playing a lot more later.
Yes. Really interesting discussion here. Anything else you'd like to say, Wade or Jacob, about the book, Steal Like an Artist?
I think for myself, it was just a wake up call for me to remember that we all have art in us, and that whatever it is, it could be like with art, the art that Wade was doing with his creativity, with just molding that head and all. And that's not for me. I'm like, I can never do that. But that might not be my interest. It might be something else. And our students all have different interests, Ruben. And to even share that, to say, hey, you know what? Find your hobby, find that passion, and go for it. And even share. I think for me, I'd have to share my experiences with them to encourage them. Like, hey, you guys, I'm in the same boat as you, and I'm having some fun with it. But I'm not always successful. But as long as I'm doing it and having pleasure in it, and learning from it, that's the goal, right? To do that, and hopefully they would follow suit and look at me as an example, maybe as somebody who would be like a mentor with them in that.
Wade, final thoughts on Steal Like an Artist?
I think I just really appreciate that idea of that nothing's completely original. You don't have to have some idea that no one else has ever had to create something, but just to get in there, start by reproducing what you're seeing other people do, and your style will eventually emerge, and you don't need to feel guilty about it. You can, fake it until you make it. You know, it's all right to fake it and just copy others. You'll find a lot of joy in anything you create.
This is very relevant stuff for teachers from beginning to end. All of us have stolen as teachers. We just need to give credit where credit is due. We copy, we find our voice. We don't give up our day job, but I think as a teacher, the idea of building your hobbies and your talents is very useful. Learning new languages, using your hands, getting in the dirt is all helpful for a teacher. So the book, Steal Like an Artist, the artist, Wade Harlan.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for joining us. I always get something when I talk to you, Wade. We both do. And we thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Wade.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, I got a lot out of it too. Thanks.
See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.